Good evening, everyone. We're really delighted tonight. Dr. Chagit Blass is speaking to us on exploring the Sugya of Sefirat. Chagit completed her PhD at Birkbeck University of London in Jewish law, focusing on halachic development. Her specific title was the Agunah in Jewish law, innovations and limitations. I'm now going to hand over to Chagit. Thank you very much, Chagit.
Thank you, Susan. Thank you for having me back. Do you hear me? The volume is okay. It's all working. Okay, one special thank you tonight is to my parents who've joined. My father spent many hours learning this with me, for which I'm very grateful. So it's his Torah. Unless I make a mistake, that would be mine. I'm going to devote our time to a few different aspects of Sfirat HaOmer. I will start with the interpretation of the Gemara on the counting that we do. You might find this section a bit dry, but please hang in there with me because it provides the basis for the rest of the topic, and I promise to keep this part short. After the Gemara on the mitzvah of counting, we'll look at three other aspects. One is the meaning of Zecher LaMikdash, a mitzvah which is done as a remembrance for the temple. The second is why we do not have a Shechianu for the first night of counting the Omer. And the third is whether it's a time-bound mitzvah or not. After that, I'll tie things up and conclude. So here I go. The Sugya of Sefirat HaOmer is pretty concise in primary literature. There are 3 psukim in the Torah, 1 daf, 1 page in the Gemara, 4 halachot in the Rambam, and 1 siman, 1 section in the Shulchan Aruch. That's it. And yet this material provides a platform for endless discussion and discourse, which is what I'd like to tap into this evening. We all know that Sefirat HaOmer is the counting of 7 weeks, which begins on the 2nd day of Pesach and ends with Shavuot. And I want to devote our time to a few aspects of this counting. But before we look at the Gemara, let's look at the framework for this counting as it appears in the Torah. We will start with the psukim in the Torah. I put these psukim and the source from the Gemara on the chat. So if you all look on the side, you will have the 2 most important sources with you throughout the evening on the chat. I'll read the psukim in Hebrew. There is a translation which you can follow. The psukim from Vayikra say, "Usfartem lachem mimochorat haShabbat, miyom aviachem et omer atnufa, 7 Shabbatot tmimot tihiyena, ad mimochorat haShabbat hashvi'it, tisperu 50 yom, v'ikravtem mincha chadasha laHashem." And in Dvarim, 7 שבועות תספור לך, מאחל חרמש בקמה, תחל לספור 7 שבועות, ועשית חג שבועות להשם אלוקיך. These psukim define our counting. And as you can see, they differentiate between counting weeks and counting days. The counting of 7 weeks is linked to the Omer, the special Omer offering of the crop, which is waved in the Mikdash. I'll elaborate on that in a minute. And the offering of the Omer marks the beginning of the 7 weeks of the counting of the Omer. Then we have in the psukim that we read, an instruction to count 50 days. Tisperu 50 yom, you shall count 50 days. But this counting is not linked to the Omer. Rather, the conclusion of those days coincides with the arrival at Shavuot, meaning once we've counted 49 days and reached the 50th day, we've reached the festival of Shavuot. So we have 7 weeks which begin with the Omer, and 50 days which are unrelated to the Omer, and conclude with Shavuot. And you'll notice that in the Torah, there is no date for Shavuot, in stark contrast to Pesach and Sukkot. It doesn't say that Shavuot is celebrated on the 6th day of Sivan. The only date given for Shavuot is the conclusion of 50 days from the beginning of the Omer. What is the Omer? It was a special offering brought on the second day of Pesach, which is made of barley and marked the beginning of the harvest season and enabled to eat chadash, new crops from that season, which I won't get into. It's an agricultural milestone with halachic significance. What is Shavuot? In the Torah, it's one of the 3 regalim, and besides the korbanot of the regel, we bring a special korban called shtei alechem, which is 2 loaves of bread made of wheat, which is another agricultural landmark with halachic significance. In the Torah, Shavuot is not explicitly linked to the receiving of the Torah, but Chazal link the two, and this is undisputed. And of course, we refer to Shavuot in our davening as Zman Matan Toratenu. So the Omer is the beginning of the harvest. Shavuot is one of the regalim. And in between the two, we have this process of counting either 7 weeks or 49 days. My first question today is, what are we counting? Is it 7 weeks or 49 days? Or more accurately, how shall we define the mitzvah of Sefirat HaOmer? Is it the counting of the weeks from the Omer? Is it the counting of the days unrelated to the Omer? Or is it both? And if so, is it 1 mitzvah or 2 mitzvot? And for this, we'll turn to 1.5 lines in the Gemara, again on your chat, and translated. This is in Masechet Menachot, and I'll read the Hebrew and you can look at the English. Amar Abaye, mitzvah lememnei yomei, u'mitzvah lememnei shvuei. Rabbanan debei Rav Ashi, manu yomei, u'manu shvuei. Ameimar mane yomei, velo mane shvuei. Amar zecher lamikdashu. Abaye states that it's a mitzvah to count days and a mitzvah to count weeks. The Beit Midrash, or school of thought of Rav Ashi, did as Abaye said. They counted days and they counted weeks. On the other hand, Ameimar counted days and did not count weeks, because he said the whole mitzvah is Zecher LaMikdash, in commemoration or remembrance of the Mikdash, in which we brought the Omer offering. And therefore, since it's just to remind us of the past, we don't need to go all out and count days and weeks. We can omit the weeks which are directly linked to the Omer and make do with counting only the days. That's the Gemara on the surface. Now let's take a more careful look and ask a few questions which arise from the words of the Gemara and try to explain it through various schools of thought. Let's start with Abaye. Mitzvah lememnei yomei u'mitzvah lememnei shvuei. It's a mitzvah to count days and a mitzvah to count weeks. Is it 1 mitzvah or 2 mitzvot? And is it a mitzvah from the Torah or a mitzvah midrabanan? What kind of a mitzvah is it? Does he agree with Ameimar that it's merely a remembrance of the Mikdash, or does he view it differently? What exactly does Abaye mean? Now to the next section. Rav Ashi's Beit Midrash counted days and weeks. They did as Abaye said one should do. We're not sure what their rationale is. That is not stated. The Gemara only states their practice, but we will assume that they agreed with Abaye and therefore adopted his practice. Now to Ameimar. Ameimar counted days and did not count weeks, because according to him, in post-temple times, the mitzvah is only in commemoration of the Mikdash because there is no Omer offering. Therefore, counting days is sufficient. A few questions arise from his position. Which part of the counting is in commemoration of the Mikdash? Are both the counting of days and counting the weeks are a mere remembrance? Or is it just the weeks which are a remembrance and the days remain a mitzvah from the Torah? And one more crucial question. What does it mean that a certain mitzvah is in commemoration of the Mikdash? What is the nature of such a mitzvah? For each of these questions, there are conflicting views within the Rishonim. and we'll look at a few positions. Each of the positions we'll see reads these 1.5 lines differently and reach different conclusions. And it's interesting to see how a Gemara, which at first glance seems pretty straightforward, provides a range of opinions and practices. We're going to start with a creative position of Rabbeinu Yerucham, one of the Rishonim from the 13th century in Provence. And he says the following. He says there are 2 separate mitzvot, counting the weeks of the Omer, which is linked in the Torah to the Omer offering, and counting the days of the Omer, which is an independent commandment in the Torah, because it says, Tisperu 50 yom, you shall count 50 days. And during the time of the Mikdash, these 2 separate mitzvot had 2 separate brachot, one bracha for counting days and one for counting weeks, just as we have 2 brachot for tefillin, one bracha for shel yad, for the arm, and one for the head, for shel rosh. But nowadays, when there's no Omer, the counting of the weeks is only midrabanan, in commemoration of the Mikdash, and has no designated bracha, but the counting of the days remains as a mitzvah from the Torah. Now we'll go back to the Gemara with this view in mind and read the Gemara according to Rabbeinu Yerucham. According to this, Abaye and Ameimar don't really have conflicting positions. Abaye says that it's a mitzvah to count days from the Torah and weeks as a remembrance midrabanan, and he therefore counted both. Ameimar counted only the days, which are from the Torah, and skipped the remembrance part, the weeks. But in principle, they both agree that there are 2 mitzvot, one of counting days, which is from the Torah and remains obligatory even today, and one of counting weeks, which is to remember the Mikdash. This is not the halacha, and we do not paskin this way, but it's an interesting interpretation of the Gemara. And in fact, the Shut Beit HaLevi discusses the practical implications of this view. We know that if a person forgets to count one night and forgets to mention the day of the Omer without a bracha the following day, he cannot continue to count with a bracha, because the count of the Omer must be complete. And if one skips out a day, he no longer counts with a bracha. Says the Beit HaLevi, perhaps according to this view, that the count of days is separate from the count of weeks, if one missed a day, he can continue to count with a bracha because he hasn't missed that entire week. The next day, it's still the same week, and he could continue to count because he hasn't missed the weekly count. Says the Beit HaLevi that although this would be a possible conclusion from Rabbeinu Yerucham's position, we don't paskin like that the counting comprises of 2 separate mitzvot, and therefore that would not be possible. What is possible is that if a person mentioned just the days or just the weeks, he can continue to count. That would be sufficient to continue counting with a bracha. The next opinion which we'll look at is the Rambam. Through the Rambam's psak, we will understand how he approached the sugya in the Gemara. We don't paskin like the Rambam either, but he too has an interesting perspective. The Rambam is on your source sheet, and you could take a quick look at it. What we see is that according to the Rambam, this mitzvah, even today, is from the Torah. It is not a commemoration of the Mikdash, but a fulfillment of the biblical positive commandment to count 50 days. However, it is one mitzvah which comprises of 2 parts rather than 2 separate mitzvot. Counting days and weeks is one mitzvah which has 2 parts to it. So we have a mitzvah from the Torah, even today, not just a remembrance midrabanan, which has 2 parts, counting days and counting weeks. Now we'll revert back to the Gemara and see how the Rambam reached this conclusion from the Sugya. According to the Rambam, the halacha is like Abaye, and this is how he understands Abaye's position. It is one mitzvah from the Torah to count days and weeks, and Rav Ashi's students agree with this position. How does the Rambam interpret a Meimar's position? According to the Rambam, a Meimar views the entire mitzvah as a commemoration of the Mikdash, just as Zecher. And he therefore decided to take a minimalist approach and to count only the days, skipping the weeks, which are specifically linked to the Omer. Lastly, according to the Rambam, also on your source sheets, women are exempt from this biblical mitzvah because it is a time-bound mitzvah. Keep this in the back of your mind, and we'll come to this later. So to summarize, Rabbeinu Yerucham claims that there are two mitzvot, one of counting weeks and one of counting days, and that counting days is a biblical mitzvah mideoraita even today. The Rambam's view is that counting days and weeks is one mitzvah with two parts, and that the entire mitzvah is from the Torah even today. And each of them gives an entirely different interpretation to the Gemara, which led them to their conclusion. Now let's take a look at the halacha as we observe it, which is how the Shulchan Aruch paskins and what we actually do. We paskin that Sfirat HaOmer nowadays is not from the Torah because it is linked to the Omer. And since there's no Omer offering, it is no longer a mitzvah from the Torah, but rather a commemoration of the Mikdash, a Zecher LaMikdash. The mitzvah is one mitzvah, not two mitzvot, in which we mention both the days and the weeks of the Omer. How does this view, which we accept, interpret the Gemara? According to this, Abaye, who counted days and weeks, did so because it's one mitzvah and accepted a Meimar's reason that it's a Zecher LaMikdash, a memorial for the Mikdash. A Meimar's reason is valid for all opinions. Just instead of his minimalist approach to only counting days, one should count both days and weeks like Abaye did and Rav Ashi's Beit Midrash did. So this was a taste of how 1.5 lines in the Gemara, which seem quite straightforward, provide a range of opinions and interpretations which are different from one another. And it helps us understand why we do what we do and the format that was chosen. In fact, this clarifies the slight difference between Ashkenazim and Sfaradim in the way we actually count. Ashkenazim say today is so many days, let's say 14 days, which are shehem, 2 weeks to the Omer. And the Sephardi Nusach is further refined and better reflects these differences. They say today is 14 days to the Omer, which is 2 weeks. By stressing that the count of the days is the count of the Omer and only then mentioning the weeks, they highlight that the most relevant count or the undisputed count is of the days, and then continue and mention the weeks just to complete the count, thereby attributing to the weeks just a little less significance than to the days, which is what we saw in the different opinions in the Gemara. All Nusachim, Ashkenazi and Sephardi, have a short Harachaman prayer after the count, which reflects the halacha as we observe it. That we're counting Zecher LaMikdash. We say, Harachaman hu yachzir lanu et avodat Beit HaMikdash limkoma, praying for the return of the service of the temple. Our next question is, what is the meaning of something which is done Zecher LaMikdash, and what halachic ramifications would that have? We have a wide range of practices that we do to remember the Mikdash, and they vary greatly from customs that we have under a chuppah, through eating korech on Leil Seder, for which we say Zecher LaMikdash ke Hillel. This is to commemorate the Mikdash as Hillel did, through leaving a small undecorated section in a new house, and various other practices. These customs are not mitzvot, but demonstrate the fact that as Jews, we live with a deep sense of acknowledgement of the past, which shapes our identity. Besides customs, there are mitzvot that are done Zecher LaMikdash, like Sfirat HaOmer, and most famously, shaking the lulav after the first day of Sukkot. On the first day of Sukkot, the mitzvah of shaking the lulav is from the Torah. It's not Zecher LaMikdash, because the pasuk says, "Ulekachtem lachem bayom harishon," that you shall take the lulav on the first day of Sukkot. But thereafter, the lulav was shaken only in the temple or in Jerusalem. But other communities did not shake the lulav. After the destruction of the temple, Rabban Yochanan ben Zakkai instated a takana, an enactment, which is a mitzvah midrabanan, that all should shake the lulav on all days of Sukkot, also after the first day, with a bracha, zecher lamikdash, in order to remember the mikdash. So both lulav after the first day and Sfirat HaOmer are mitzvot which are zecher lamikdash, on which we say a birkat mitzvah. We say asher kidshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu. There are two sugyot in the Gemara which govern what we do zecher lamikdash, and they are different from one another. I would like to take a look at both of them, and through highlighting different aspects of them, we will better understand the concept of Zecher LaMikdash. These are again on your source sheet, and I will read the translation. The first is the Gemara in Masechet Sukkah. And the Mishnah begins, originally the lulav was taken in the temple for 7 days, and in the rest of the country outside the temple, it was taken for 1 day. Once the temple was destroyed, Rabban Yochanan ben Zakkai instituted an ordinance that the lulav should be taken even in the rest of the country for 7 days in commemoration of the temple. The Gemara asks, from where do we derive that we institute ordinances in commemoration of the temple? Rabbi Yochanan said, as the verse states, for I will restore health unto you, and I will heal you of your wounds, says the Lord. For they called you discarded, saying, she is Zion, there is none that seeks her. From the fact that the verse states, there is none that seeks her, it can be learned by inference that it requires seeking. People should think and remember the temple. That is the reason for Rabban Yochanan ben Zakkai's ordinances. Or in Hebrew, the pasuk is, Tzion hi doresh ein la, miklal debai drisha. This Gemara is seeking support or proof, what we call an asmachta, for the practice that Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai instituted to shake the lulav throughout Sukkot in all locations as a remembrance for the Mikdash, and it cites a pasuk as the basis for the practice. The pasuk speaks of Jerusalem's abandonment. The nations abandoned Jerusalem, and she is deserted. Therefore, the Gemara learns that we, in our practices, should actively seek and remember Jerusalem. This pasuk appears in Sefer Yirmiyahu within a perek of transformation. The perek begins by describing Jerusalem's suffering and abandonment, and after this pasuk, the chapter takes a turn and discusses the future rebuilding of Jerusalem and the vibrancy it will experience. With this pasuk in mind and its context and symbolism, we'll turn to the second Gemara. Again, you have it on your sheets, and that is in Masechet Bava Batra. This is at the end of the third perek of Bava Batra, and the Gemara tells the following story. The sages taught, when the temple was destroyed a second time, there was an increase in the number of ascetics amongst the Jews who did not eat meat and drink wine. Rabbi Yoshua said to them, my children, for what reason do you not eat meat and drink wine? They said to him, shall we eat meat from which offerings are sacrificed upon the altar, and now the altar has ceased to exist? Shall we drink wine which is poured as a libation upon the altar, and now has ceased to exist? Rabbi Yochanan said to them, if so, we will not eat bread, since the meal offerings have ceased. They replied, you are correct. It is possible to subsist with produce. He said to them, we will not eat produce, since the bringing of the first fruits have ceased. They replied, "You are correct. We will no longer eat the produce, as it is possible to subsist with other produce." He said to them, "If so, we will not drink water, since the water libation has ceased." They were silent, as they realized that they could not survive without water. Rabbi Yoshua said to them, "My children, come and I will tell you how we should act. To not mourn at all is impossible, as the decree was already issued and the temple has been destroyed. But to mourn excessively is impossible, as the sages do not issue a decree upon the public unless a majority of the public is able to abide by it. Rather, a person may plaster his house, but leave a small amount without plaster to remember the destruction of the temple. A person may prepare a meal, but leave out a small item. A woman may adorn her jewelry, but must leave out a small matter, as it is stated, "Im eshkachech Yerushalayim tishkach yemini, tidbak leshoni lechiki im lo ezkerechi, im lo aale et Yerushalayim al rosh simchati." And anyone who mourns for the destruction of Jerusalem will merit to see its joy. This beautiful Gemara discusses the pain and loss that Jews felt after the destruction of the temple and the process they went through to find a balance between mourning for the Mikdash and, at the same time, resuming normal life. And the Gemara enumerates practices that are done zecher lamikdash, to remember the Mikdash, which some we recognize from our own lives. But in contrast to the previous Gemara, the pasuk cited as support for these practices is a different one. It's not about seeking Jerusalem because the nations have abandoned her. It's the pasuk from Tehillim, which we all know, because every chatan says it under his chuppah, "Im eshkachech Yerushalayim tishkach yemini." This pasuk is taken from a chapter in Tehillim, which we say on Tisha B'Av, in which we mourn the destruction of Jerusalem and the disaster that was brought about. This chapter does not offer hope and rebuilding as the previous one does. It is a chapter devoted only to the tragic aspects of Jerusalem. Ask Rav Soloveitchik, why are the psukim supporting the various practices different? Why is the pasuk for the remembrance of the lulav is one of seeking Jerusalem from a chapter of transformation, and the one for the other practices is a pasuk of mourning? Why didn't the Gemara use the same pasuk for all practices devoted to remembering the Mikdash? And he concludes that there are two kinds of zecher lamikdash. There are two forms of remembering the Mikdash. The first form is remembering the destruction of the Mikdash, the horrors that took place, and the deep sense of loss. That is symbolized in the pasuk, "Im eshkachech Yerushalayim." In those moments, we remember the pain. And we do so under a chuppah and on other various occasions. We remind ourselves of great national pain. But there is another form of remembrance, not the remembrance of the destruction of the temple, but of the glory of the temple. Remembering Jerusalem at its finest moment, at its splendor, rather than its pain. And that is what we do on Sukkot. We remember the Mikdash at the best of times, when people came from every corner of the world to celebrate together. In what category is Sefirat HaOmer? Is it a remembrance of sadness or of glory? It is a remembrance of sadness, not of glory. It is not like Sukkot, but rather like the other customs that we have. The different forms of Zecher LaMikdash tie into the next subjects I'd like to address, and that is, why do we not say Asher Chiyanu on the first night of the Omer? On all other mitzvot for which we have a Birkat mitzvah, we say Asher Chiyanu. Why do we not have one on this one? We say Asher Chiyanu on lighting Hanukkah candles, hearing the Megillah, blowing the shofar, etc., etc. Why don't we not have one here? You might be thinking it's because Sefirat HaOmer is just a Zecher LaMikdash, but so is Lulav. So you'll say that the first day of Lulav is Mideoraita. but we have a Shechianu for Lulav even if the first day of Sukkot is on Shabbat and we only begin shaking the Lulav on the second day. It's a question which troubled many Rishonim and Achronim, for which there are at least 7 different reasons. One opinion, for example, is that the Shechianu for the Omer is included in the Shechianu for Pesach, or that it's included in the Shechianu for Shavuot when we complete the count. Both these reasons assume that there should be a Shechianu, and therefore attribute another Shechianu to it. But there are opinions that there is no Shechianu at all for Sfirat HaOmer, and I'm going to concentrate on 3 of those. The Baal HaMaor explains that we only make a Shechianu when there is an element of simcha, of joy. On Sukkot, we have the joy of the Chag itself, and on Purim, we celebrate our salvation. Even on Yom Kippur, when we say a Shechianu, there's an element of simcha. After all, it's a Yom Tov, and every Yom Tov carries an element of simcha. On Yom Kippur, we have simcha for the opportunity to do tshuva, and for our tshuva to be accepted. But Sfirat HaOmer is different, as we said before. Sfirat HaOmer is merely a remembrance of the Mikdash that doesn't carry simcha, and therefore it doesn't have a Shechianu. Another explanation is that of the Chidushei Agriz. The Griz tries to explain the difference between the Lulav and Sfirat HaOmer in relation to making a Shechianu. He says that whilst it's true that both mitzvot are Zecher LaMikdash, to remember the Mikdash, they differ. The Lulav is the same mitzvah as we did in the temple. We're continuing the same practice, just the reason for it changed. And now it is Zecher LaMikdash. But Sfirat HaOmer is not the same mitzvah that was done in the Mikdash. This one is a new mitzvah. We have no Omer offering. And this new mitzvah we do in order to remember the Mikdash. On a mitzvah which was created as a remembrance for the Mikdash, we do not have a Shechianu. Whereas on continuing an old mitzvah with a new reason, such as the Lulav, we continue to make a Shechianu. These explanations make sense if we view the mitzvah of Sfirat HaOmer as a Zecher LaMikdash. But let's go back for a minute to the Rambam. His view is that Sfirat HaOmer is not a mitzvah of remembrance, but a fulfillment of the biblical commandment to count 50 days, Tisperu 50 Yom, which is detached from the Omer. According to the Rambam school of thought, why is there no Shechianu? For this, we'll take a look at the Sefer HaChinuch on Parashat Emor. That is on your source sheet. The Sefer HaChinuch was from the 13th century in Barcelona. It's a count of the mitzvot according to the Rambam, but in the order of the parashot in the Torah, with an explanation on each mitzvah. Now, the translation you have is not the finest, so you could take a look at it. I will read a few sentences from the Hebrew and then explain what the Sefer HaChinuch says. Mitzvat Sfirat HaOmer. לספור 49 יום מיום הבאת העומר, שהוא יום 16 בניסן. שנאמר, וספרתם לכם ממחרת השבת מיום אביאכם את עומר התנופה. משורשי המצווה על צד הפשט, לפי שכל עיקרן של ישראל אינו אלא התורה, ומפני התורה נבראו שמיים וארץ וישראל. והיא העיקר והסיבה שנגאלו ויצאו ממצרים, כדי שיקבלו את התורה בסיני ויקיימוה. ועניין גדול הוא להם יותר מן החירות מעבדות. ומפני כן נצטווינו למנות ממחרת יום טוב של פסח עד יום נתינת התורה, כי המניין מראה לאדם, כי כל אישו וכל חפצו להגיע אל הזמן ההוא. According to Sefer HaChinuch, who views this mitzvah as a mitzvah mideoraita, and does not mention the remembrance element, the mitzvah to count symbolizes our transition from our slavery in Egypt to the much more significant event of receiving the Torah on Har Sinai. According to the Sefer HaChinuch, the purpose of our redemption was to receive the Torah. So the counting is a mitzvah of transition and anticipation. We are going through this period in order to arrive at Shavuot and receive the Torah. The bracha of Shechianu is the opposite of transition. We bless Hashem who brought us to this season, Shehigianu lazman hazeh, for the arrival at a certain time. And that is why Sfirat HaOmer, which is a mitzvah of transition, doesn't have a Shechianu. This is again Rav Soloveitchik's explanation. So he has an explanation for both positions. If the mitzvah is a mitzvah mideoraita, it is a transitional mitzvah which a Shechianu doesn't suit. And if it's a pure remembrance, then it is a remembrance of sadness rather than of glory, which also would not warrant a Shechianu. I'm now going to move on to my final topic before I conclude, and that is discussing whether Sfirat HaOmer is a time-bound mitzvah or is it not a time-bound mitzvah? This question isn't only interesting for a so-called women's shiur. It's interesting beyond that because clarifying the answer causes us to crystallize the definition of a time-bound mitzvah. The question is a machloket between the Rambam and the Ramban, Nachmanides. We saw the Rambam earlier, and he specifies that women are not obligated in counting the Omer. And all agree that his reasoning is because it's a mitzvah taseh she'hazman gama, a mitzvah which is triggered by time, which is what the phrase she'hazman gama actually means. However, the Ramban, in his Chidushim on the Gemara, in Masechet Kiddushin, discusses a list of mitzvot, those which are time-bound and those which are not. And in his list of mitzvot which are not time-bound, he lists the mitzvah of Sfirat HaOmer. It's not that he just refers to Sfirat HaOmer as not being time-bound. He explicitly includes it in the list of mitzvot which aren't. And many find this stance of the Ramban difficult to resolve. And it therefore triggers a discussion about the definition of time-bound. Just to demonstrate how puzzling it is, I'll mention the Shut Divrei Malkiel, which resolves the matter by saying that it's a typo. His opinion is that the Ramban did not include Sfirat HaOmer in the list of mitzvot which are not time-bound, but when it went to print, the printer made a mistake and confused the abbreviation of Sfirat HaOmer, which is Samech Hei Ayin, with that of Matnot Aniyim, which is Mem Taf Ayin, and a totally different mitzvah, which isn't time-bound. It's not impossible, it's plausible. But we are going to look at others who resolve it by discussing the topic itself. The Bi'ur on Sefer HaMitzvot of Rabbi Saadia Gaon defines a mitzvah taseh she'hazman gama not only as a mitzvah which is triggered by time, but by a specific date. It cannot be a mitzvah which is triggered by an event. It has to carry a certain date in order to be a mitzvah taseh she'hazman gama. For example, Pesach and Sukkot have a specific date in the Torah. Therefore, sitting in the sukkah or eating matzah are time-bound mitzvot. We're obligated to eat matzah, even though it's time-bound, but it is a mitzvah which is triggered by a noted date. In contrast, Sfirat HaOmer does not have a date. The Torah links it to the Omer offering. The counting begins when the Omer offering is offered in the Mikdash. and therefore it can't be defined as one which is triggered by time. This definition raises two questions. Firstly, on the Rambam. According to this definition, why would the Rambam count it as a time-bound mitzvah if it is triggered by an event rather than by a date? An answer offered to this is that the Rambam sees this mitzvah as triggered by a date, the second day of Pesach. The Torah chooses to mark that date with the Omer, but it is a fixed date. And this position also fits with the Rambam's approach that the mitzvah is from the Torah and not midrabanan. Even though we do not have the Omer today, the mitzvah of counting begins on the second day of Pesach, with or without the Omer, and therefore is not really linked to the Omer. But this raises another question on the Ramban himself. The Ramban thinks that the mitzvah today is only midrabanan, as a zecher, or remembrance, because we don't have an Omer offering. So why would the Ramban define it as a mitzvah which is linked to the Omer if we do not have an Omer today, rather than view it as time-bound? The answer to that is that even though the Omer no longer exists, the Torah defines it according to the Omer, and therefore it cannot be defined as time-bound. So are women obligated in it according to the Ramban? No, but not because it's time-bound, but because it's tightly linked to the Omer. And since women aren't obligated in the Omer, they are not obligated in the counting which enumerates from it. Another view is of the Chochmat Shlomo, which is refined by the Sridei Esh. The Chochmat Shlomo defines a mitzvah taseh she'azman gama as follows: that the object by which one performs a mitzvah exists all year round. However, we can utilize it for a mitzvah only during a specific time. For example, a sukkah or a matzah can exist all year round, but we can perform a mitzvah with them only during a specific time. That is what defines a time-bound mitzvah. Eating matzah today or sitting in a sukkah tomorrow is not a mitzvah, but eating matzah on the first day of Pesach is a mitzvah. What's the difference? The timing. Therefore, those are time-bound mitzvot. What about Sefirat HaOmer? The counting of the Omer doesn't have an object. Counting is not an object. The object which we use for this mitzvah is time itself. So it is not a mitzvah which is triggered or defined by time. Rather, it's a mitzvah of time. Time is the essence of the mitzvah. With other mitzvot, we have a mitzvah, and a specific time is the framework for that mitzvah. But with Sefirat HaOmer, both the mitzvah itself and the framework for it is time. It's a mitzvah of time. Therefore, it cannot be considered to be a mitzvah taseh she'azman gama. Are women obligated or exempt? Most think they are exempt, either because they hold like the Rambam that it's a time-bound mitzvah, or for other reasons, such as we mentioned before, that it's linked to the Omer, and since women are not obligated in the Omer, they're not obligated in the counting that originates from it. But there are poskim, such as the Baal Halachot Psukot, which don't differentiate between men's obligations and women's obligation. The Baal Halachot Psukot writes, V'chayav Adam lispor. And the explanation is, Umilshon Adam, mashma shu sover, shegam nashim chayavot, hainu kol Adam. Meaning, the Baal Halachot Psukot writes that every person is obligated in counting. He uses the term Adam, a person. And from the word Adam, from person, rather than a man, we learn that women are obligated as well because all people must count. But that is not the common view. I'm going to end with a quote, but I'd like to recap before I do so. We discussed the mitzvah of counting and what it is we're counting. We discussed creating a remembrance for the past through various practices, including our counting. And we discussed the concept of time and of counting time. But what does this counting actually mean to us? What is the significance of counting these days, which begin on Pesach and end with Shavuot? And for this, I'll turn to the last source on your sheet, in which Rav Soloveitchik relates to these elements and beautifully expresses what many of us feel. In consequence, the Jew is aware experientially of the past and committed to the future, which is a reality to him. To exist as a Jew means to be at the juncture of past and future, of that which is no longer real and that which is not yet real. Our mission is to live in both dimensions. The experiential merger of past and future, of recollection and anticipation, is symbolized by the process of counting. When one counts, one ushers in a mathematical series a continuum. Kant remarked that at any position in which you find yourself while counting, you have to be aware of two things, the preceding positions and those that follow. For instance, when we count the 33rd day of the Omer, we ipso facto state that this position was preceded by 32 previous positions. At the same time, we know that 33 is not the last station. From here, we will move on to additional positions. In other words, any act of counting embraces retrospection as well as anticipation. I look forward and I am aware of what I did last night. Sorry, I look backward and I am aware of what I did last night, and I look forward and I know that the counting tonight is not the final one. This experience is not given to the Jew simply as a gratuitous gift. This time awareness is more a challenge than a datum. If he is indeed questing for that synthesis of memory and anticipation, the Jew may attain his goal if he is ready to pay the price, which is study. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Chagit. I don't know if you want to take questions on the chat or live.
I'm happy to. I don't see anything on the chat, but if you want live, I'm happy to, unless I'm missing something.
Okay, I've just unmuted everyone. So does anyone want to ask a question?
This is very interesting. Very interesting.
Okay, so I'll assume there are no questions. You can always contact Chagit afterwards. So I want to thank you very much, Chagit. Such a rigorous, meticulous exploration of Sefirat Homer with such profound and perceptive analysis. Give us much greater depth and meaning to our Sefirat Homer. So thank you very much. Next Sunday, Rabbi Koenigsberg will be speaking on an ancient nation with modern problems, halachic dilemmas in the state of Israel. I want to thank everyone for joining us, but before we finish, I want to hand over to Naomi Landy, who's got an announcement on behalf of Riley Close. So thank you, Naomi.
Okay, thank you, Susan. Thank you very much, Chagit. I just want to mention a three-part series entitled The Race to Beat COVID-19 in the UK, which is taking place on Zoom at 8:30 tomorrow, Monday evening, and at the same time on 2 subsequent Monday evenings. For details, please contact myself, Riley Close Shul Office, Rabbi Ginsbury, or Rabbi Portnoy. Thank you all very much for joining us this evening. Good night.
Thank you, and I echo Naomi's thanks, and good night, everyone.